Good evening. It is a privilege to welcome you to the distinguished faculty lecture this evening at Walla Walla University. It's been a little while since we've been together to do this important event. This is one of those events where we celebrate our existence as a community of faith and discovery by gathering to listen intently to one of our colleagues. It's a privilege to welcome you to this event this evening. I'm joined in this welcome by none other than the chair of the Board of Trustees of Walla Walla University. I wonder if I could invite you to put your hands together and welcome John Friedman, President of the North Pacific Union Conference and our board chair.
It's a privilege to be here on campus again, and it's been a little while since I've been here, but it is good. It's good to see the students, and it's good to see faculty and staff and be back together. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of Walla Walla University, I just want to extend a welcome to you. Thank the students, all of you students, for being a part of Walla Walla. You chose to be here. You could choose to go someplace else. We're glad you're here at Walla Walla. So thank you for being here tonight and being a part of this wonderful university. And again, Lord bless you as you hear this lecture here tonight.
I invite you to join me in prayer. Father in heaven, as we gather this evening, we invite you to be present with us while acknowledging you are powerful and trustworthy. We praise you for this opportunity to celebrate our university's pursuit of excellence in thought, and we're particularly grateful tonight for Dr. Austin Archer, our kind, thoughtful, and humble colleague who has shared so much with this university over the past 30 years. May his words tonight open our ears to really hear, to help us broaden our understanding and focus our hearts as we lift our eyes to you. Make his words serve as an inspiration for us to all become better people. And we pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Good evening, and once again, welcome to this distinguished faculty lectureship. A long tradition at Walla Walla University, going back at least to 1993, which is almost as long as tonight's speaker has been here. Our speaker tonight is none other than Dr. Austin Cameron Archer, who has been here at Walla Walla University for the last 30 years as an educator in the fields of education and psychology. He holds degrees from Andrews University and also from Illinois State University, where he earned his Ph.D. But he began his work as an educator much earlier than even completing his bachelor's degree. He began as an educator when he was merely 17 years old, assuming duties as a science and math teacher at the Harmon School of Seventh-day Adventists on the island of Tobago. We are truly privileged tonight to have Dr. Austin Archer share with us in this long tradition of the distinguished faculty lecture. Dr. Archer.
Good evening, and thank you, Walker, for this introduction. Just one slight correction. In honor of my beloved Hoosiers, my degree is from Indiana University rather than Illinois State, where I did work, actually. And thanks to all of you for being present for this event. It turns out that this event tonight is for me something of a swan song. As many of you know, in 54 days, I will end my regular full-time service at Walla Walla University. So it seems appropriate that I begin with some words of gratitude. It was around this time, 31 years ago, that I received a phone call in my faculty office at Illinois State University from a man I did not know, inviting me to a place with a funny name in a part of the country I'd never seen and did not in my wildest dreams consider coming to live. My wife and I often recount the series of events that eventually led this then young family of 4 and 1 on the way to come to what was then Walla Walla College. No need to recount the events here. Suffice it to say that we have no doubt that it was providence at work. And we are thankful to God for the opportunity to spend the better part of our adult lives serving in this remarkable place. I'm thankful that it allowed me to serve in a department that has been a model of collegiality and congeniality. I'm thankful for a succession of deans, Merle Greenway, Ralph Copeland, Steve Pollock, Mark Heinold, Julian Melgosa, Denise Dunsweiler, and of course, Debbie Mothersbaugh. Each of them, in their unique way, promoted this spirit. Each of them supportive to a fault. All of them becoming my dear friends. I'm thankful for the colleagues within my department as well as across campus with whom I've been blessed to serve on committees, in church work, collaborating on numerous projects, or who just became friends. I'm thankful for the students who have challenged me, many of whom have gone on to great careers. I hope I have in some way contributed to their achievements. I know that there are some students here and former colleagues and students stretching as far back as our time at Caribbean Union College, as well as relatives and friends spanning across the country and far beyond who are watching tonight. Your messages of encouragement and support over the last few days mean much more than you can imagine. I thank you for the honor of your presence. I'm thankful also for our university administration, as well as administrations past, from the one led by Niels Erik Andreasen to John McVeigh, on whose cabinet I was privileged to serve as chair of the faculty. And of course, I'm thankful for my wife, who trusted me to come along in this journey, sight unseen, and who continues to be the joy of my life and a corrective for my failings. And our children, Kirsten, Amanda, and Jack, whose intelligence, commitment, and social conscience continue to give us reason for pride. And I'm thankful for our new granddaughter, Raven, who is daily multiplying our joy. I couldn't resist that. Now, in the context of this evening's proceedings, I'm grateful to the Faculty Development Committee and truly humbled to have been invited to be tonight's speaker. It is an honor that I sincerely did not expect. I hope that I can justify your faith in me for what I have to say this evening. There's much more that can be said, but enough for now. Let's get on with the talk. Mind. I have changed my mind, or my mind has been changed. These are statements we make all the time. I was thinking of going to Walmart, but I changed my mind and went to Andy's. I thought that all murderers deserve the death penalty, but having heard your argument, my mind has been changed. What do we mean when we refer to mind? The APA Dictionary of Psychology renders the following definitions. Broadly, all intellectual and psychological phenomena of an organism encompassing motivational, affective, behavioral, perceptual, and cognitive systems, that is, the organized totality of an organism's mental and psychic processes, and the structural and functional cognitive components on which they depend. 2, the substantive content of such mental and psychic processes. Specifically, I will focus on 2 of these processes, namely memory and decision-making. In addition, the notion of mind, as discussed in psychology, tends to limit itself to an individual, as this third definition suggests, consciousness or awareness, particularly as specific to an individual. However, I will extend my discussion to look at the mind in a social or communal sense as well. So what does it mean to change minds? The most common meaning is discussed by Howard Gardner, the Harvard University psychologist, in his 2004 book, Changing Minds. Gardner presents this sense of the term as follows. We have a mind set in one direction, and lo and behold, the mind is now set in another direction after some operation is performed. Gardner limited his discussion of changing minds to cases that are significant, such as changes in political or ideological allegiance, religious convictions, or career goals. Secondly, such changes must be conscious. Gardner is limiting his discussion to decisions that the mind makes. According to this meaning, and following Gardner then, I have changed my mind may mean that I have made a decision that is a reversal of a decision previously made, or I no longer hold the same belief about that thing that I previously held. In both cases, it is assumed that mind is a volitional process that is actively changed. Alternatively, a person may say, my mind has been changed, meaning arguments or evidence have been presented that now make previous beliefs untenable. Here, there appears to be less of a volitional element, less agency. There's an inevitability to the change. My mind has been forced into a new configuration, as it were, by weight of evidence. Yet it is still a conscious process. As we shall see, we resist such changes, probably to preserve agency or our sense of self. We seek to change our minds ourselves, or we seek to preserve our decisions or beliefs or perceptions. There's a second way of thinking of changing minds, not captured by Gardner's approach. This way of thinking about mind is a reference to the contents of consciousness, as in our current perceptions of experience. Sorry about that. Something is not working here, but we'll go on. as I was saying, this way of thinking about mind is a reference to the contents of consciousness, as in our current perceptions of experience, that is, immediate or working memory, or our stored account of past first-hand experiences. We call that episodic or autobiographical memories. To summarize then, changing minds could refer to conscious and deliberate change in decisions, a change of belief forced by weight of evidence, or a change in our apprehension of reality as recorded or constructed in memory. In this talk, I hope to explore these varied aspects of changes of mind and make some applications to our current experience as Americans, as educators, as a church. I should also warn you that although I will be presenting the results of scholarly work in my discipline, I will also challenge you to change your minds about some things. First, memory. Where were you when you first heard about Russian missiles in Cuba? Do you remember? Now, if you are around my age, you probably do. I did not then live in the United States. I was a child, still in elementary school, but I read the newspapers. And I remember seeing a map on the front page of the Trinidad Guardian newspaper. It's a map that I can still see in my mind's eye. As I remember it, the map consisted of the Western Hemisphere extending from the eastern seaboard of the United States down to the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago being the southernmost islands. At the center of the map was Cuba, and around it was a few concentric circles describing the areas that would be affected were there to be a nuclear attack on Cuba by the United States. What got my attention and aroused some measure of anxiety was that Trinidad and Tobago were within the circle. Having seen the map on that day in October 1962, my mind was changed such that I can still see it. Now, if you are somewhat younger, you probably remember where you were when you heard that Martin Luther King had been killed, or Robert Kennedy assassinated, or any of the other terrible things that occurred in the summer of 1968. My most vivid memory of that summer was walking home from the public library in the town of Scarborough in Tobago one late evening in July and meeting a schoolmate named Andre, who told me the terrible news that Dave, our mutual classmate and my distant cousin, had just drowned in the nearby beach. How about the January day in 1986 when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, killing all 8 astronauts aboard? Do you remember? Or if you are younger still, you might have vivid memories of 9/11. Or finally, coming to the age of most of you who are students, election night of 2008, or January 6, 2021. Most of these are cases of communal memory, memories that millions share. But there are also more personal memories, like the one I just related of my own memory of 1968, memories that are unique to you. Your first day at school, your first date, or your honeymoon night. In each of the cases I've cited, your mind was changed by the event. That is to say, connections and networks in your brain were rewired to capture that new event such that it can be accessed later. We refer to that as autobiographical memory. And whether you alone experienced the event, or you shared the event with one person or millions of people, Each mind, indeed each brain, was changed in a unique way. I've not had a conversation with my friend Andre about that fateful July afternoon in 1968, nor have I gone to the archives of the Trinidad Guardian to confirm the accuracy of the map that I saw in 1962. Now, after writing these words, I went on a search and found this map. Is this a map I saw? Seems identical to what I remember. Probably it is, or one similar to it. But I've not seen this map since 1962, when I first saw it. What I do know, and what memory researchers have demonstrated, is that I may have remembered these events rather differently than the way they happened. In other words, I might have developed a false memory. And you might as well. Not only was my mind changed when I experienced those events, but more importantly, it might have changed further in a number of ways. Here is a sample of the results. In 1932, Sir Frederick Bartlett of Cambridge University in England published his major work on remembering, in which he proposed that when we experience an event, we organize the information regarding those experiences into a network of abstract structures he called schemas. Bartlett's pioneering work laid the foundation for later work built in the insight that memory is not something permanently laid down in the brain like a video image or a track on a recording tape. Rather, it is a constantly morphing configuration of connected networks dependent on prior experience to determine its initial form and reconstructed each time a recollection is attempted, each new reconstruction dependent on intervening experiences. To put it more simply, when you experience an event, your mind changes in that new schemas are formed. We may call that a memory. The remarkable thing to note is that the form that memory takes is dependent on your earlier experiences of related events and even your expectations of what that event ought to be. Further, that memory is not static. It will change as you hear others talk about that event or see news items about that event. When you attempt to retrieve the account of the event from memory, your reconstruction of the memory will be influenced by the current conditions, the expectations others have, your beliefs about what should have occurred, and even the way the question was posed. The result is that what you remember would likely not be an identical account of the event, though it usually includes the gist, a kernel of truth, that with parts that may be entirely false. Henry Roediger and Kathleen McDermott in 1995, building on a procedure first reported by James Dease back in 1959, presented lists of 15 related words to participants with one critical word missing. For example, the following list would be presented: butter, food, eat, sandwich, rye, jam, milk, flour, jelly, dough, crust, slice, wine, loaf, toast. There's a critical word not on that list. Participants were then tested on their memory of the list. The researchers found that more than half the time, the participants falsely recalled the critical word, even though it was not presented. Have you guessed yet what the critical word is? The critical word that was not presented is bread. Here are some other lists with the critical unpresented word at the top. Now, the one second from your left, sleep, is one that is probably most commonly used in demonstrating this effect. And I experienced it for the first time some years ago at a conference, psychologists, where a psychologist from Purdue University talking about this phenomenon, which was not well known at the time by the community, repeated that list of words, and he warned us beforehand not to recall any word that we did not see on the list. But that room of psychologists, I would guess maybe 50 plus of us, about a third of us remembered sleep, even though we were warned about the effect. The mind had constructed a memory of an event that never happened. Other studies support the notion that our minds store and retrieve information that is not necessarily identical to our experiences, but that fit some general schema derived from our experiences. Two studies carried out by the man you see here on the slide, Ulrich Neisser, illustrate this effect. Following the release of the Nixon tapes related to the Watergate scandal, Neisser compared the testimony of John Dean III, who had been President Nixon's White House counsel, with the tapes that had been recorded in the Oval Office of events that Dean had testified about. Those of you who were around at the time may recall that Dean was hailed for his remarkable memory and the detail of his testimony. He was widely praised for remembering so much detail. Yet, in a paper entitled John Dean's Memory, Neisser demonstrated that Dean did, in fact, get a lot of details wrong, though the central message, the gist, that the president had engaged in a cover-up in the Watergate scandal remained intact. Another study by Neisser showed that this event was not unique to Mr. Dean. Soon after the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle in January 1986, a disaster that obliterated the lives of 7 astronauts, including the highly anticipated first teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe, Neisser asked his students to answer questions about their experience. 3 years later, those same students were asked the same questions about the event that they had all witnessed. 40% of them gave answers that were clearly inconsistent with their earlier account. This latter case is an example of an event that evoked strong emotional responses from people. You would think that highly emotional events would be remembered more accurately. So let me take you back once more to 9/11. Suppose you are President of the United States and the country is attacked. You would remember every detail of that day, wouldn't you? Let me then share with you what Duke University psychologist Daniel Greenberg reported in a 2004 article. On 3 occasions following the events of 9/11, President Bush was asked about his recollections of the time he first heard the news of the attack. I'll give you Mr. Bush's answers as Greenberg reported it. 2 were verbatim reports. Another was a reporter's account. The first was in answer to a young boy named Jordan, asked at a town hall meeting on December 14, 2001. I'm sorry, December 4, 2001. The president responds, "Well, Jordan, you're not going to believe what state I was in when I heard about the terrorist attack. I was in Florida. and my chief of staff, Andy Card, what's happening here? Let me go on. My chief of staff, Andy Card, actually, I was in a classroom talking about a reading program that works, and I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go on. And I used to fly myself, and I said, there's one terrible pilot. And I said, it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think about it. And I was sitting in the classroom, and Andy Card, my chief, who was sitting over there, walked in and said, a second plane has hit the tower. America is under attack. A second response came about 2 weeks later on December 20, 2001. This time, the president is speaking to a reporter for a news story. Here is the account as the reporter related it. Bush remembers senior advisor Karl Rove bringing him the news, saying it appeared to be an accident involving a small twin-engine plane. In fact, it was American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 out of Boston's Logan International Airport. Based on what he was told, Bush assumed it was an accident. This is pilot error, the president recalled saying. It's unbelievable that somebody would do this. Conferring with Andrew H. Card Jr., his White House chief of staff, Bush said, the guy must have had a heart attack. At 9:05 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175, also a Boeing 767, smashed into the south tower of the Trade Center. Bush was seated on the stool in the classroom when Card whispered the news. A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. Another 2 weeks later, January 5, 2002, the president is again in a town hall meeting, and he is again asked his recollection. Here is the verbatim account. I was sitting there, and my chief of staff, well, first of all, when we walked into the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and I thought it was pilot error. I was amazed that anybody could make such a terrible mistake. And something was wrong with the plane, Anyway, I'm sitting there, listening to the briefing, and Andy Card came and said, America is under attack. 3 rather similar accounts in many ways, but with some clear discrepancies, especially between the second account and the first and third accounts, which are quite similar. Did Mr. Rove bring him the news of the second, as the second account says, or did he see the first plane hit the tower, as he claimed the first and third accounts? Well, what we do know is that he could not have seen on TV the first tower hit because no one did. It was not broadcast live. But he must have seen footage as news media repeatedly broadcast it in the intervening 3 months before his December 4 response to Jordan. And somehow these were inserted into his memory, changing his mind. And now he claims it as his memory. Now let me emphasize here that I'm not dealing with a person with a faulty memory, nor are we dealing with a liar. What this and what I will say next should alert us to is the thin ice that we are likely to be on when we accuse someone of lying. Well, what would these small discrepancies matter if he got the gist right? Well, it would matter if you were in a court of law and the defendant's life depended on it. Probably the most prolific researcher regarding the vagaries of memory is Elizabeth Loftus, formerly of the University of Washington, now at UC Irvine. In a series of studies beginning in the mid-1970s, Loftus and her collaborators have shown that our memories of our experiences can be fragile at times, and that we can remember things that never happened. In one early study, Loftus and her collaborators showed that the form of a question can influence how a memory was reconstructed, such that observers of a traffic accident estimated speeds varying on average from 31.8 to 40 miles per hour, depending on whether the question used the word smashed or contacted. On a later experiment, participants again reported significantly higher speeds in answer to a question using the word smashed than the word hit. But what was more remarkable was that irrespective of the speed estimate, participants were more likely to report that they had seen broken glass if the word smashed had been used, even though, in fact, there was no broken glass. Loftus has since demonstrated that under the right conditions, persons remembered having been lost in a shopping mall as a child, though it never happened, as having gone to Disney World and shaken hands with Bugs Bunny, which of course is impossible since Bugs Bunny is not a Disney character. What we find in all these cases is a paradox of change and perseverance. There's a strong motivation to preserve the gist, the essence of a memory, even if it means changing the details to keep that essence intact. And a sobering fact about false memory is that how certain you are about a memory bears no relation to its accuracy. There are real implications for faulty eyewitness testimony, as the Innocence Project and Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative have demonstrated. The work of Loftus and other memory researchers is not just textbook stuff. According to Prison Fellowship, since 1989, the United States has used DNA testing to exonerate 225 innocent people after they had spent years in captivity. According to the Death Row Information Center, since 1973, at least 186 people who have been wrongly accused, in fact, wrongly convicted and sentenced to death in the United States have been exonerated. Many of those were convicted by faulty eyewitness testimony. The number of innocent persons whose cases were not discovered in time before they were executed is, of course, unknown. Is it time for a society that claims that all lives matter to change its mind about an irrevocable penalty that continues to kill innocent people? In research published earlier this year, Loftus and her collaborators showed that push polls can not only affect attitudes, they can also increase false memories for fake news stories. An example of a push poll would be, would you still support Jim Bob for student body president if you knew that he beat his girlfriend? Now, this effect was true for positive and negative stories concerning both fictitious characters and well-known public figures. Furthermore, this effect was stronger after a delay of 1 week between the push poll and the news story. Changing minds can be easy and sometimes imperceptible. Now let's turn to prophecy. If memory is a personal record of experience in the past, prophecy is a projection into the future. In prophecy also, minds can change, though not in the same way. And when prophecy fails or appears to fail, changing minds can be hard. I begin with a story familiar with Adventists. Sometime during the 1820s, a New England farmer named William Miller came to believe, after extensive study of prophetic scripture, that the second coming of Jesus, and therefore the end of the world as we know it, would occur sometime around 1843. It was not until 1831 or so that he began actively to propagate that message. Though he did not set a specific date, others in the growing movement came to believe that the critical date was March 21, 1844. That date passed without incident, but the belief became stronger. Apparently, the passing of the early date did not lead to significant attrition, only more searching that led to an adjustment of that date to October 22, 1844. As the time approached, there was heightened expectation among the group, now numbering possibly in the hundreds of thousands. Many sacrificed personal and social relationships. Crops were left untended, unharvested. Much energy was expended in warning loved ones. When this final prophecy failed, they were left with a conundrum. Two opposite ideas cannot live well in the same mind. The prophecy cannot be true and not true at the same time. If the prophecy is true, they couldn't still be on earth. Such cognitive conflict is untenable. They were left with broad options. Either abandon belief altogether, thus admitting that the prophecy was not true, or change the meaning of the event that was prophesied. In the end, tens of thousands took the first option and abandoned belief. But a smaller number, including our spiritual ancestors, continued to believe. Social psychologist Leon Festinger had examined this record and others in the historical record and was intrigued by this and a number of other similar narratives. He had looked at earlier prophetic movements, including the Anabaptists, who predicted the beginning of the millennium in 1533, and the Jewish seer Zappatai Zevi, who predicted the coming of the Messiah in 1648, and again in 1666. He began to develop a theory to explain what happens to followers when prophetic movements fail. Festinger formulated the hypothesis that when a prophecy is subjected to disconfirmation, that is, when a prophecy fails, there arises a disconnect between belief and reality, what he termed cognitive dissonance. There would naturally be a high motivation to reduce this dissonance. One way of doing so would be to abandon belief in the face of the evidence, the disconfirmation. But what if this belief was bought at a high price? What if holding on to the belief came at the expense of family or job or great personal or economic loss? The balance may now swing to the other side, not to change your mind, but to change the facts, or at least the meaning of the facts. In 1954, Festinger and his colleagues at the University of Minnesota found the perfect opportunity to test this theory. They describe what happened next in their 1956 book, When Prophecy Fails. A Chicago woman named Dorothy Martin had received what she claimed to be supernatural messages that in the coming months there would be a cataclysmic earthquake resulting in a flood that would destroy large sections of North and South America. A group of believers gathered around her, including a Michigan doctor who became a major recruiter and leader of the group. But this was not a mere prophecy of doom. Salvation was promised to believers in the form of a flying saucer that would arrive before dawn on December 21 to take believers to another planet and to safety. Fessinger and his colleagues at the University of Minnesota contrived to infiltrate this group of believers to study this process from the inside. Since we are still here on the western side of the continent, and on this planet no less, we know that Mrs. Martin's prophecy failed. When the flying saucer did not arrive on December 21 as expected, that was explained by the leader as a minor delay. But the scheduled arrivals continually failed to occur, and explanation after explanation became less tenable. It eventually became clear that it would not happen. And of course, no such earthquake occurred either. How did the believers respond? As one might expect, the leaders were the ones who had expended the most. They continued to believe even after this confirmation. All the believers experienced extreme emotional upset at the repeated failure of this flying saucer to arrive. Those believers who had fostered doubts or were skeptical of the prophecy quickly left the group. But many believers remained. Some may have had initial doubts, but these were removed by the leaders' rationalizations. Those who were isolated from the central group suffered the greatest disillusionment, but many had expended much to remain believers. Some had left their jobs, others had left their studies, many had sacrificed relationships. For many of these, conviction increased after this confirmation. As Fessinger and his colleagues predicted, they dealt with their cognitive dissonance by holding on even more strongly to their belief. I have mentioned evidence from the 16th and 17th centuries, the Millerites in the 19th century, and the believers in the 20th century. There's also the most recent example of Mr. Harold Camping of Family Radio, who predicted that the world would end in 1988, and then 1994, and then March 21, 2011, and finally October 21, 2011. Each time the prophecy failed, each time the failure was explained as a mere miscalculation with greater confidence that the new date was correct. And each time there were thousands of his radio followers who believed. Camping finally repented after the last failure and gave up his predictions before he passed away in 2013. In 2015, a young charismatic preacher named Jeremiah Johnson prophesied that Donald Trump will be elected to the presidency. Other prophets followed with concurring predictions, the number increasing as Mr. Trump rose in the polls. Misgivings about his personal life gave way to the biblical model of King Cyrus. Misgivings about his personal life gave way, and the biblical model of King Cyrus was invoked as a type to match the 20th century antitype. The prophecy was disseminated first by Charisma magazine and through various forms of social media, notably YouTube. Considering that the original prophecy came at a time when Mr. Trump was seen as a rank outsider by most informed insiders, and before he had risen to be a contender in the polls, his eventual surprise election in 2016 would have been seen as a significant verification of the prophetic authenticity. Therefore, considering that many prophets had already predicted not one, but two terms for the president, it would not have been surprising that even more prophets joined the fray in 2020. Throughout the world of charismatic Christianity, prophets were proclaiming the re-election of the president. It was easier to reject the polls this time. Were they not wrong in 2016? And when the early returns on the evening of November 3 raised hopes, the celebrations began. Surely God had ordained this leader to lead America to greatness. But in the days following November 4, it became increasingly clear that the prophecies were failing. What do you do when prophecy fails? Fessinger had hypothesized back in 1954 that when belief did not match reality, cognitive dissonance would increase, resulting in a high motivation to reduce that dissonance by either changing beliefs to match the facts or changing the facts to be more consonant with belief. But changing minds can be difficult. And when one has expended a great deal of one's own personal capital, of treasure, of sense of self and reputation, and prophetic credibility, the prophecy must remain true, even if the facts on the ground appear to say otherwise. It's hard to change your mind. The alternative is to change the facts or one's interpretation of the facts. And so for the whole period between November 4 and January 20, the prophets doubled down. Daily YouTube reports were put out by prophets such as Kat Kerr, who you see on the left, Hank Kunneman, Sid Roth, Dutch Sheets. These have continued in the months following the inauguration. The prophets insisted that somehow the rulings of courts and the results of recounts and audits notwithstanding, Mr. Trump would be declared president by January 6, or sometime before the inauguration on January 20, or even after the inauguration. Some insisted that all would be set right by March 4 or August 13. As recently as October 22, on a YouTube broadcast on a channel that boasts 177,000 subscribers, Robin Bullock, another of the prophets, said that, quote, Joe Biden is not the president of the United States. For these prophets and their many followers, changing belief was much too costly for their sense of self and for their faith. In order to resolve the cognitive dissonance and restore equilibrium, the only alternative was to change the facts. For them, Mr. Trump must still be president. As we have seen, changing minds is hard, particularly so when one is not just changing one's mind about a specific event, but rather changing one's worldview. Some time ago, I began to inquire into the question, how do people experience significant changes of mind? My concern was not so much the causes or correlated variables. I wanted to understand from a more phenomenological perspective what people experience as they journey through a change in their belief system. I attempted to answer that question using a qualitative approach. I interviewed 11 participants who had indicated that they had experienced such a change, exploring with them at some depth their own experience as they went through that significant change of mind. Before I proceed in telling you what I found, it would be appropriate for me to provide a few caveats. This was a modest qualitative study without the sample size nor the methodology that would allow for wide generalization. However, it gave a window into the experiences of these individuals and provided some understanding of what people in similar settings might go through. It also may provide the groundwork for further exploration. So, what did these persons' experience show? I identified three phases. The pre-change phase that preceded the change phase or mid-change phase, if you like, and a post-change phase, what comes after the change has occurred. Before change occurs, that is in the pre-change phase, an individual is in a state of comfort or what I call emotional quiescence. The person is comfortable about their religious or psychological stance or philosophical stance, but this quiescence ends with a precipitating event. An event occurs that upsets the prevailing equilibrium, an event that raises questions about one's status quo. This can be a massive, life-changing event that overcomes all defenses, like the death of a loved one or a major illness or something like that. More likely, it can be a relatively small event, a culmination to a series of lesser events that threaten the prevailing worldview but did not by themselves overthrow it. Like the final blow of a sledgehammer that finally breaches a wall previously impregnable to single blows, this event finally breaches the defenses of confirmation bias and puts the individual in a state of disequilibrium. Examples of such an event may include a scientific study that challenges accepted dogma, an irrevocable break in a relationship, a discontinuation of prophecy, or rather a disconfirmation of prophecy. These and other such precipitating events mark the end of the pre-change phase and herald the change phase. This phase, the change phase, can be fast, occurring over a short period of time, or it may be slow, extending over a period of months or years. Change may be gradual, or it may be punctuated by bursts of insight. As the process of change proceeds, there may be anxiety or unease. The person is off balance. The Piagetian term disequilibrium could be aptly applied here. The person undergoing a major change in worldview is likely confronted with existential questions about their place in the world. They may be faced with practical decisions about careers and personal relationships. As time passes in this phase, there may be vacillation. Am I on the right course? Is my logic faulty? Have I lost my faith? Am I even sane? In some, this phase is characterized by emotional turmoil and decision-making. But finally, a mental Rubicon, as it were, is crossed, and the person finds themselves in the post-change phase. As I suggested earlier, this may not be sudden and may not be a well-defined end to the process. Still, an increased emotional comfort resumes. One of my participants described it as a sense of peace. And yet, consistent with our theme of change and perseverance, it appears that the break from the past is often not complete. Even in the face of radical change, there are enduring connections to past ideas, past communities, past patterns of behavior. Of the individuals in my study whose worldview was related to religious belief, all continued to identify with their religious community, even in the face of significant deviation from previously held religious tenets. Finally, I want to briefly address the issue of a societal change of mind. Like individuals, societies or societal groups from time to time undergo major changes in their consensus regarding accepted beliefs. Americans did not always agree that republicanism was preferable to monarchy, nor did Americans always generally agree that people with dark skin from Africa or Asia were social and intellectual equals with people who originated in Europe. Not even Abraham Lincoln believed that. Post-1844 Adventists did not always agree that the Sabbath on Saturday was an important religious discipline, or that giving attention to our physical health had merit. Like individuals, societies and large social groups are resistant to change. Like individuals, societies undergo significant upheaval on the path to change. One recent dramatic example of how a whole society can change its mind was highlighted by a study by Stanford University sociologist Michael Rosenfeld. This is a recent case that we can learn from. After examining survey data covering the past 50 years, Rosenfeld concluded that, quote, no measured public opinion attitude in the United States has changed more and more quickly than same-sex marriage. To illustrate that dramatic change, let me show you two charts, the only ones I will show you tonight. The first chart compares societal attitude trends regarding abortion on the left, those regarding approval of gay rights on the right. So, abortion, gay marriage. Notice how level the lines on the left are. Note the dramatic upward trend on the right. The lines represent specific questions having to do with abortion rights or gay rights, respectively. On the right, then, the lines represent questions about whether you would allow a gay speaker, whether you would allow a gay speaker, allow a gay author's book, or approve a gay teacher. Those are these lines at the top. And as you see, there's a moderate increase in each of those attitudes over the years that are described there. But now pay attention to the bottom three lines on the right. Those questions have to do with whether one approves, that's these lines, those questions have to do with whether one approves of gay sex or whether one approves of gay marriage. That is, sex between two gay people, or whether one approves of gay marriage. Note the steep rise, especially after around 2005 or so. The question is, what causes such a dramatic social change? The first thing to say is that a social change such as this might be a result of an accumulation of individual changes of mind that have reached some critical mass. Second, this might point to unique and powerful processes that occur when people operate in groups. One such process Rosenfeld identified is the effect of leaders. In this case, public embrace of the LGBT plus community by popular political leaders, particularly in this particular case, President Bill Clinton. Now, his later embrace of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the Defense of Marriage Act have made him less of a hero in the LGBT plus community, but Rosenfeld argues that his influence on the society's attitude was still lasting and significant. Now, another is the effect of gays and lesbians who came out of the closet. For the first time, people discovered that they had friends and acquaintances, work colleagues, even family members who were gay or lesbian. They could now identify with them and their attitudes changed. Whatever your views on this issue, the point ought not to be lost. Identifying with members of a disfavored group, working side by side with them, realizing that they are part of your family, can change your mind about them. Society, or segments of a society such as a church, tend to change slowly. But there are times when society needs to change rapidly, and we can learn from this case something about how society changes. How our society, how our church, or indeed our university can change. Not all change is desirable, of course. Some change represents a drift along with the current of the wider society that may run counter to our mission or our values. But when that current goes in the right direction, as it sometimes does, we must not resist it. Our society has been slow to change on matters regarding race. We have slumbered under the illusion that we have moved a long way, and in some ways we have. But if 2008 lulled us into complacency, more recent events should wake us up. There is much change to occur on this front if our nation is to be healed. Also, our nation must, as I hinted earlier, change its mind about the death penalty. One must wonder whether we have been slow because the victims of unjust execution are so often those people, not your aunt or uncle, not your sister or brother or best friend. Third, our world is undergoing a crisis that we have been slow to recognize as seas begin to rise due to the warming of our planet. This is not a future event. Our complacency here in the inland Northwest does not match the urgency experienced by people in the islands of the Maldives in the Indian Ocean or the Marshall Islands in the Pacific as they see their living space literally disappear under the rising waters. We must change our minds about how we care both for our planet and the people who live in vulnerable parts of it. Fourth, our church has been slow to change its mind on matters of equality in ministry and on other issues as well. We should not ignore the important role that leaders must take at all levels to catalyze a change of mind in this issue. Prophecy has often been thought of as predicting or foretelling the future, and this is the sense in which I have used it so far tonight. In the cases I cited, the record of prophets has not been stellar. We really aren't good at predicting the future, and we don't have a good record of interpreting prophecy. I would like to suggest another sense in which the word may be used consistent with biblical prophets, and that is one who casts a vision of a better future and calls on people to live up to that vision. May I suggest that what we need as a nation, as a university, as a denomination, is prophets of that sort who can cast a vision of a better future, calling on us to change our minds on race, on gender, on criminal justice, on caring for our planet, and on caring for the least. First to those who are closest to us, but in the uttermost parts of the world as well. Let's begin to change our minds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Archer, for helping us walk through these concepts of prophecy and memory, but also considering the ways that changing minds means to us individually and also collectively as a society. At this moment, dear audience, it is your opportunity to turn this into a dialogue. If my friends with the mics could come on up, you have an opportunity to ask questions here to Dr. Archer. We'll have 2 mics going around. So if you'd want to maybe step into the aisle and they can come towards you or raise your hand.
I guess they're being easy on me.
That seems a little too easy. Maybe I can start with a small question. Knowing that we have some of our students here listening and also perhaps watching online, I'm wondering, in terms of this topic, a piece of advice that you would share with them about changing minds for our students. A piece of advice you might give them as they think about how to apply this in their lives.
I think we need to stay open. We need to be aware of the barriers towards changing minds. And the more aware we are, the more open we are likely to be to change.
I'm just curious if this is a topic you've been interested in a long time, or is this something that has been recent interest of yours?
I read When Prophecy Fails in graduate school. So that's some time ago. So that part of it has been an interest in that respect. My interest in memory also is long-standing because my graduate work is in cognition and learning, and memory has been a perpetual interest of mine. And by the way, as one gets older, one gets even more interested in memory.
you. My question is, at least as a student who's always grown up in the Adventist religion, in a culture of open-mindedness and change, when you're making those new decisions or kind of trying to figure it out for yourself, when you've grown up in such a specific culture, what do you suggest, I guess?
I'm afraid I'm not getting it. The sound is not coming through clearly to me. Could someone repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry. As I've grown up in the Adventist religion, and also being in a society that's very open-minded and open to new change, especially in same-sex marriage and all of that kind of stuff, what do you suggest when I'm trying to make decisions and kind of deconstruct a lot of the religious biases that I've grown up hearing? What is your advice as to sticking to what I've already known, whether that be biblical or just what I've been taught, versus being completely open-minded to what society says? Like, how do you make that distinction in an educated way?
I think, well, first of all, we have specific religious commitments that are based on our belief in Scripture. And I think we need to take those seriously. But I think we have to also continually balance them with unfolding knowledge. So our attitudes may have to change, not necessarily to go against our religious beliefs, but to take into account the rest of the knowledge we have. And just so that I'm clear, my citing of the case of changing in attitudes was an attempt to show how societies change. Now, whether what the issue is on which you choose to change is up to you and your philosophical beliefs. And one's philosophy certainly does underlie the ways in which we change we make our decisions. Does that help?
All right, last chance for questions. Last chance, last moment. Any hands, a question you'd like to ask before we prepare to close this evening? All right, before we have our prayer, I would really like us again to give a great thanks to Dr. Archer for his presentation this evening.
I invite you to bow your heads with me as we close with prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for the privilege of being part of a community of faith and discovery, where we have the opportunity to listen to words from treasured colleagues and teachers that can change our minds. And we ask that you will go with us from this place and help us to continue to have our minds changed to be even more like the mind that was in Christ. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.